The presenting sponsor of OnEducation is Participate. Lately, teachers from all over have been working together to find new approaches to provide quality remote education. Participate's sister company, Participate Learning, presents United We Teach, a global gathering place for educators to share distance learning resources as we navigate these strange times. For these resources and more, visit participate.com/oneducation.
The talent is there. I hear programs. I hear you want to increase Black and brown leadership. What I don't hear is what you're actually doing after you release that statement.
Welcome back to the podcast, everyone. Victoria Thompson is a STEM integration transformation coach, and she's an author and a blogger and a speaker on STEM. Her work focuses on K-12 mathematics instruction with research on decolonizing mathematics curriculum for teachers and learners, creating inclusive STEM environments, and using technology to bridge equity gaps in STEM education. Welcome to OnEducation, Victoria.
Hi, thank you. I'm super excited to be here today.
So I just gave everyone kind of the Cole's Notes version of your bio. Why don't you take us a little deeper? Tell us a little bit more about yourself and your background and what brought you to us today.
Yeah. So I started, okay, I'll preface this. So I live in the Seattle area. I'm not a Seattle resident at all. So I live in Tacoma, didn't grow up here. I am a proud New Jersey girl. I'm a Jersey girl. And I'm also a proud product of New Jersey K through 12 public schools. So I always like to throw that out there, because I grew up, going to public schools and really loving my experience. And then I went to college in South Carolina. I'm at the College of Charleston, and my bachelor's is in elementary education. And then a fun tidbit is my wife and I actually started a scholarship at the College of Charleston for Black and Indigenous people of color, and also people of color that are planning to pursue education as a career, which is very exciting. But that's kind of an aside. But I did go to College of Charleston, and when I graduated, I started teaching at a middle school in Summerville, South Carolina. So I was there for about 4 years, and then I was dating Courtney at the time. And I was actually funny, but not funny. I went to a Greek festival with a couple of friends, and, she was flying a military mission. She comes back and she says, "We're moving." And I say, "No, we're not." There's no way that we're moving, because we did not talk about this. But she had gotten military orders to go to the base up in Seattle, and automatically assumed that I was going to be okay with it. So she was like, "Yep, Victoria's going to come with me." And at first I was a little apprehensive, because even though Seattle's exciting, I had been, New Jersey, South Carolina, I had been East Coast all my life. So West Coast was something that was a little foreign to me. But we decided to take the leap and go, because it just seemed too good to be true. And, there's just a lot of opportunity in Seattle. So I started out as a full-time tech consultant, actually working directly with Microsoft. And while that was super fun, I just don't think that it was a good fit, because I'm an educator first and a marketer second. Right? And they kind of look for the marketing, how can we put devices in kids' hands? How can we get more folks to use apps? And although I love to do that, I was just missing that connection, with teachers and kids. So I got back into schools, and I started working at a school here in the Tacoma area that unfortunately I had to leave. I don't know how frequently y'all follow me on social media, but, the head of schools at that school was saying some kind of shady stuff and racist stuff. So as a Black woman, I just didn't feel safe at all. And I feel like it was fate where, I literally, after that meeting where he said those things, I saw a notification on Indeed that said, "Hey, STEM integration transformation coach," right, at Technology Access Foundation. And I was just like, I'm going to apply. We're just going to see what happens. If worst comes to worst, I can find another job. I can stay. I've got options. So I sent over my resume and my application, and literally within 5 minutes, the director emailed me and said, "Okay, so you're coming in for an interview tomorrow, right?" And then by the end of the week, I had a different job.
Wow.
So that's kind of like a whirlwind, back and forth about who I am. But I feel like it really was fate in a lot of different ways that brought me to to where I am now. So that's like me professionally. And then in my personal life, a lot of my research just focuses on STEM education and math education, specifically for Black and brown folks in multiple communities. I feel like every so often there's something that happens where it's like, let's cancel algebra 2, or, we don't need calculus, and, let's do applied mathematics instead. And while they're all valid points, I think that a lot of the attention needs to be redirected towards gatekeeping. If I'm looking at the traditional AP calculus class, it's mostly white kids, they're mostly Asian kids. We don't really see a lot of Black, brown, and indigenous folks in those spaces. So that's challenging because I want equity, I want access, but right now, of course, it's not. It's just not happening at this point. Mm-hmm. So what can we do to level the playing field without cheapening the curriculum and kind of making all these false pathways for our students? And that's what I focus on just in my personal life.
So Victoria, you have one of the most interesting job titles. I'm also an instructional coach. We began as a technology integrationist, but you're a STEM integration transformation coach. It has a lot to that title. A lot of powerful aspects that if I saw that, I'd be like, this is something that's beyond just a normal instructional coach.
Right.
So tell us about your move from a teaching role to this coaching role. And I've been reading some of your blog posts about your day-to-day activities as a coach and what that's like, and just tell us about that move, that transition.
Yeah. So I'm going to preface this by saying that coaching roles are really hard to come by, right? You might have 40 plus teachers in a school, but one coach. Or
yes.
Maybe if you're lucky and if you're in a small district, maybe one coach per district. So that to me, when I got that job notification, I just kind of thought, okay, this is my opportunity and I'm going to take it, because coaching roles, Glenn, you probably know they do not come nearly as often as folks think they are. It's almost like a principal or a superintendent position. There are very few openings, and usually they already have somebody vetted for that role that's been a teacher there for a very long time. So my transition was super swift, specifically because I was moving from a private independent environment for a school, right? Because I was at a private boarding school. And now I'm in this public-private partnership. So I'm not an employee of the school district. I'm an employee of Technology Access Foundation, which is a nonprofit leader in education all across the state of Washington. It is one of only 2 co-managed schools in a public-private partnership in the state of Washington. So the district itself has its own instructional coach. And he is amazing. He and I collaborate so well, but he focuses mostly on the ELA, the humanities, and just district stuff that I'm not privy to because I'm not a district employee, right? Sure. So he works with coaching evaluation, he works with, restructuring humanities curriculum, that's his jam. My jam is STEM, of course, and I'm a former math educator, so that parlays really well into this role, but it's more than just elevating STEM at the school. I working with teachers, of course, to infuse STEM into all of their topics. My big thing in my role, that's literally part of my job duties, is infusing project-based learning as a vehicle for equity. So at the school that I work at and at all co-managed schools, it's not science over here. For folks who are listening, I'm waving my hands, but it's science over here, right? Math over here, ELA over here. All projects are done together. And of course there are segmented, right? If math wants to have a quiz on proportions, and if science wants to have a formative assessment on, exponential growth and decay in population, they can do that. But the final products themselves actually happen not in a vacuum, but together. So that's been really powerful for me, especially in my role as a coach, because I oversee all of those projects and I make sure that teachers are getting the support that they need. And it's a very, PBL isn't an unconventional model, but it's unconventional, I feel to have an entire school whose focus is PBL, right? And that's the public-private partnership that we have, at this school. And when I was in South Carolina, I interviewed for a couple, public-private partnerships, and I just didn't get a good vibe. It wasn't together. It wasn't segmented. It kind of felt like everyone was doing their own thing. And it felt like they wanted the private partnership money, but still kind of wanted to operate on that public standpoint. Where I'm at now is so different, and people know what they're doing. It's so nice to be at a place that just finally gets it. And they understand that education education doesn't operate in a vacuum, and they get that kids have the best learning experiences when they're learning from each other and they know that subjects connect. And there's just a lot of neat things going on and opportunities for collaboration. That's wonderful. Another part of my role is I leverage and work with community partners for these projects. So because we want the product, of course, with PBL to be authentic, I'm making sure that we're working with community partners, getting the word out, talking to them, inviting them in through Skype in the classroom or Zoom or whatever. That way the kids know that, an engineer doesn't just play with robots all day. An engineer has multiple different things that they do in their day-to-day jobs. And it also, of course, with that authentic element, if a kid sees what the folks are doing, then they become interested, right? And then they begin to think about their career track. So I just talked a lot and I'll stop. But it's a really neat position because it's more than just being an instructional coach. Mm-hmm. It's instructional coach with the lens of equity and also with the lens of anti-racism, right? Because if we're a co-managed school, we're doing PBL as a vehicle for equity. We are intentionally making choices and decisions in our instructional practices to make sure that all of our students are loved, heard, valued, and respected. And sometimes that doesn't come from the straight up curriculum. But what I do is I help them find resources. I help them work on projects. I help them do things so that way they can be better at their craft and that kids know that the world is more than just, the white guy that they see in a textbook.
So that's amazing. And I suspect, Victoria, that there are tons of educators out there, especially right now, during this kind of time,
right?
Looking for ideas, searching, for ideas, for guidance, and coaching on how to inject these kind of anti-racist practices and pedagogy into their work and into STEM. And in particular, I'm thinking back to my role before I joined Participate, was working for a STEM and robotics company and thinking about how I would have, because I would have been looked on as someone that could advise people on how to do some of this or try to do some of this, and I'm super interested in what you would tell folks who are listening right now and are frankly feeling stuck a little, like not sure where to even start, but passionate, really want to. How would you advise them on the best way to inject this kind of like this anti-racist lens into STEM specifically? Yeah.
So what I always advise for folks to do who are just starting and they, just like how you said, they really have no idea where to begin, the easiest and most impactful thing that you can do on a tactical level is decolonize your curriculum. And what that means is most curriculum in STEM specifically is extraordinarily white, is very white. And this is not me being cheeky. This is just me being honest, right? Like the first time I heard about, hidden figures, right? The first time I heard about it was when I saw the movie.
It was when I saw the movie, yeah.
Literally when I saw the movie. And I'm a black woman, and my parents were very pro-black. They didn't even know until they saw the movie, right? So we glorify Albert Einstein, we glorify, Watson and Crick, and not to discount the, the achievements that they've made in STEM. But we know that scientists of color exist, or STEMinists, as I call them, right? Like folks that are involved in STEM. We know that STEMinists of color exist. We know that STEMinists that are women exist. Why don't we really hear about them? We hear about Marie Curie, kind of. We hear about Florence Nightingale. That's about it. There's an entire other world of folks that are just there. So one of the favorite projects that I used to give when I was a classroom teacher, and now I'm kind of reworking and leveraging this as a coach, is I gave my students a list of folks that are involved in STEM. And on that list, it was all the heavy hitters, right? It's like Albert Einstein, it's, I'm like blanking for words right now, of course, but Albert Einstein was definitely on there. There were physicists, Marie Curie was on there, Florence Nightingale was on there. There were quite a few folks that were on there. that like people would know. And like specifically for me as a former math educator, it was Pythagoras, right, with his theorem. So we're looking at folks that we would know. So I gave them the form and I said, do you know these people, or at least most of them? And I was at an all-girls school and they said, yes, I do. I know exactly who they are. So I said, okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to do a math report / project / whatever. And you cannot pick anybody on this list to do research on and have fun, right? And they were floored. And I got a lot of pushback on them about how they did not know how they were going to find research on anybody else because these were set in stone. So that's kind of that implicit knowledge that is unfortunately learned in class, right? And then if we also think about algorithms just on the internet and STEM in general, if you Google scientist, you're going to see 99% of pictures of white men. Yeah. Or like I even did it yesterday when I was Googling chef, right? Because I also run a STEM cooking class, which is wonderful. But, we do an activity. What does a chef look like? And when my kids, they Google chef for inspiration, most of it's white men. And if it's students of color or, like young ladies in the class, they kind of get disheartened because they don't see that representation there.
Oh my God, I just Googled chef in Google Images.
Mm-hmm. And what do you see? What do you see, Mike?
It is all white dudes. The first black dude is like 10 pages down.
Yes. So I've actually done it within the algorithm enough where the first black guy comes up on page 3 for me.
Swedish chef comes up before the first black guy.
Yes. You will see Swedish chef before you see a person of color, which is crazy to me, right? So like as, of course, a person of color and a woman myself, I look at all these things and I'm thinking it is so intentional and easy for you to take it away from these folks, right? And again, not to discount the work that white chefs do. Mario Batali is my favorite. I love him. But we know that chefs of color exist the same way that we know that scientists and mathematicians of color exist. And it was the most empowering moment for my students to go from literally, Mrs. Thompson, I do not know if I can find anybody. And then we changed that to, Mrs. Thompson, I cannot believe I found that much. And that was just a simple project. Scientist, mathematician, engineer, technological person that you find interesting that is not on this list. And that was really easy. And I'm also thinking, with my math mind, going back to talking about surface area volume, really cool opportunities to bring up pyramids of Giza, right? Let's not think about, not countries, but, statues and monuments that are in America. Let's take it to other countries, right? Let's talk about Taj Mahal. Let's talk about how the top of the Taj Mahal is made up of many different components that make up the area and the volume. Let's talk about pyramids of Giza. Let's talk about, the pyramid shape and how that relates to surface area. Let's talk about, even if we wanted to go Eurocentric but not United States, let's talk about Eiffel Tower, right? It's kind of a pyramid, but not really. So there are a lot of different ways for you to bring in other cultures that are decentering American whiteness, but are still highlighting, the great things, that other folks do that we just don't seem to get in the United States right now. And it's frustrating, but there are ways to combat that and make it more equitable for your students.
So you've kind of touched on this already a little bit, but I want to dig a little bit deeper. STEM education has a pretty crappy track record. Like when you're talking about chefs and you're talking about lots of other industries, but STEM education has a pretty crappy track record of being a field full of white dudes that look exactly like me. And it's like a fraternity. And I'll even admit that over the last few years, as I personally have been working to include more diverse voices in my news and social media consumption, I became painfully aware of how underrepresented people of color were, how little their voices were heard, even though it was obvious, now in hindsight, it's obvious that a lot of people were doing very incredible work. And in this moment, I'm in particular thinking about Black people, but specifically also as a Canadian, and as someone that's traveled, to Northern Ontario and a lot of remote communities, really aware of the lack of First Nations voices as well in the field. And it's funny, me working to personally fix that in myself in terms of like the voices I'm listening to and who I'm paying attention to is what brought me to you. Which is awesome. I'd love for you to speak to your experience trying to be heard in an ocean of white dudes, because I imagine if you Googled STEM education teacher, it would also have a list of 10 images of guys, nerdy looking pasty white guys that look like exactly like me.
Yes. Correct. Frustration, party of one. So if I'm talking about my experience, specifically being heard by white men, I unfortunately, I kind of want to take this a step back a bit and just talk about being heard in an ocean of white people. Right? Because sometimes it's not men. Sometimes women, unfortunately, can be just as aggressive to me. And I've actually had more microaggressions towards me from white women in tech than men. And I'm wondering if maybe it's because as a white woman, like, I'm not speaking from my experience, obviously I'm not white, but I'm wondering if the white women in the field, right, because they fought so hard to get there, it's almost like they're part of a secret club, right? And then suddenly a person of color who's also a woman comes up. If that's like competition, like that's something that has always been in the back of my mind, because I truly have seen and unfortunately been the brunt of more microaggressions from white women than I have been from white men. And to give you a very specific example, when I was a subject matter expert at Microsoft not too long ago on a project, my credentials got called into question by a white female. And she was, you can't see me right now for those that are listening, but I'm doing air quotes. She was an audience subject matter expert on education. Homegirl had never taught a day in her life. She had never been a principal. She didn't even have a credential. The last time she was in school was when she graduated from it. I don't know how I know how, she was white, but she walked into this position in the EdTech marketing department and was like, hey, I'm a subject matter expert now, y'all need to listen to me. And she was there, I don't even know for how long, but then I show up as an actual subject matter expert, right? Like I'm young, I'm 27, but I think I've got 5 years in the field, I've taught, I'm an instructional coach now, I present at conferences, like I'm young, but I'm no spring chicken when it comes to this kind of stuff. And especially comparing my resume to hers, I very clearly had more experience and also more expertise in doing this kind of work. And literally in a meeting, she asked me point blank, and it was a 15-person meeting, so it wasn't just me and her. She looked at me and she said, "Who even are you?" And I'm not the kind of person that like loses it in public. But I kind of did. And I said, with all due respect, I have my master's degree in curriculum and instruction. I have my bachelor's degree in elementary education. I have consulted for this company before. I've also consulted for multiple companies before. I presented at the national and international level on my work. I worked here, 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 and here. I do this work. So I'm going to turn the question back on you and ask you, who even are you? And she didn't like that question very much, right? For lots of different reasons, but I think that part of it was because the question was being turned back on her from me, and she also didn't know how she could answer it. So what's
it like to constantly have to recite your resume to people? I can't even I'm kind of considering putting it on a shirt.
That way whenever I walk into a room, I can just be like, bam,
right.
Here are my credentials, right? And it's wild because I've literally never had to do this unless I'm working with big tech. I've never had to do this in any other scenario, like at all the schools I've worked with. I don't know if any of y'all are connected with Craig Kemp with Ignite EdTech. I just recently signed on with his firm. Didn't have to answer any questions about my credentials. He was just like, yo, I'm interested in your work. If you want to come on the team, you come on the team. And I graciously accepted that offer. Big tech is the only place where I've had to field my credentials, which is wild. And then the microaggressions that happened after that. Let's talk about that, okay? So she tried to stall my pay. She wouldn't approve my pay because I called her out on it and I had to escalate it up the chain. That's something that happened. She also refused to accept my work and tried to consult, and actually was successful in outsourcing that to a different consulting company that was still within, the big tech realm, but she didn't want to use me as a subject matter expert anymore. That led to over budget in the project, and then again, still trying to not pay me. So this took many, and I'm not afraid to say this because it happened and I have the receipts and people are aware of it, right? I literally had to escalate up the chain for a month because people it's not that they weren't believing me. They were just like, we want to make sure that we have all of these ridiculous details together because we cannot believe that an adult in her position is acting that way, right? So it took about a month of receipts, hey, here's what happened. I'm positive that it happened. For them to, of course I got paid and I got the apology that I was warranted, but again, why is she there? And I know I'm kind of going off on a tangent at this point, but I think it really speaks to the fact that as a person of color, and I know that I'm not the only person that was in that position, that's part of the reason why it does kind of become like a white male fraternity, right? Because I should not have to deal with this. No person of color, no woman, no indigenous person should ever have to deal with this. Yeah. This is not something that should happen. If you look at my resume, I have the credential. So why are my credentials being called into question by somebody that has none? And that's just not me being cheeky. These are cold, hard facts. So if I'm taking a look then as to how to fix this, I feel like it's twofold. The first is that we've got to stop letting people without the credential be part of the club. And there are a lot of great companies I work with now. I'm a huge Pear Deck fan. I stan Pear Deck. Pear Deck is absolutely one of my favorites.
I stan Pear Deck too.
Yes. So they're an add-on for Google Slides and Microsoft. Pear Deck puts their money where their mouth is. Pear Deck released a statement, I remember when all the George Floyd murders started happening in the States. They donated not only $50,000 to anti-racist initiatives, but they also were investing in anti-racist, anti-bias training. And they formed an editorial board, which I'm a part of, by the way, to make spaces more equitable for Black and Indigenous people of the United States and just also all cultures. And then on top of that for LGBTQ folks and also for special needs folks. I look at that and I'm thinking that's money where your mouth is. That's not lip service. That's you intentionally investing in things that are going to make your company better.
Difference between talking and doing.
Right. Versus what I experienced at that other place? Absolutely not.
Well, every ed tech company released a statement. Right. Some of them weren't worth the words, the clickety clack on the computer keyboard. Right.
And that's kind of where. So when I made my blog post about why I love Pear Deck so much, because I really do. I've got Perry, he's chilling on my desk right now. But that was perhaps one of the first, if not the first time that I've ever seen an ed tech company be like, yep, we know things are messed up, so here's what we're going to do, and actually do it.
Yeah.
Right. They are actually doing the work, and I love that. And Buncie's the same way. Right? Bunsey reaches out to folks that use the platform and they're intentionally, looking for diverse authors. They put a spotlight on diverse people and it doesn't seem like pandering because it happens all the time. They don't need to feel or do some type of thing about it because they're already doing it. Yeah. So to fix it, again, we can't have people that don't have the credential because to me, if I'm in an ed tech company, this is the equivalent to having somebody in your promo that doesn't even use your products, right? And if we go even deeper, it's having people on your team that don't even have the credential to be there. And if you've ever read Algorithms of Oppression by Sophia Noble, great book that talks exactly about this. This entire concept of tech companies, where's the Black talent, right? Where's the Indigenous talent? The talent is out there. They're just not looking for it. They give us lip service about, we're going to start this new credentialing program that, doesn't have high school or college degrees and you can just take a couple classes and work at Google. That's lip service, right? We hear the programs. We don't know about any of the follow-up. The talent is there. I hear programs. I hear you want to increase Black and brown leadership. What I don't hear is what you're actually doing after you release that statement. But what I would like for you to do is fix it from the inside.
Yeah. So I was thinking about Victoria Thompson.
That is me.
and I was thinking about, and this is one of those questions I was talking to my friend about earlier today, about being, a Black female member of the LGBTQ community.
Yes.
That's kind of like all of the things that, the ways that you can be discriminated against are like a tide coming at you.
My wife and I call it discrimination Olympics, right? Like pick one. We're somewhere on there.
I didn't know how to frame it, and I'm so glad that you found a way to wrap it in what I was thinking, because my God, I'm interested in your your experience must be absolutely fascinating, and definitely something we can all learn from. I'm curious about how we make STEM more accessible to females, and then how we make STEM accessible to, Black females, and then how we make STEM accessible to also members of the LGBTQ community. And curious if, and I'm not expecting you to solve all social issues in one answer to a question, but I mean, are the answers to solving this accessibility problem, I'm curious if you think they're different depending on who we're talking about. And I think the answer is probably yes, especially based on what you said just a few minutes ago, talking about your experiences prior. But also, there's got to be some intersectionality between those experiences, too, because you've also referenced how hard, you're aware that, there's white women that also had to work pretty hard to get recognized just because they're females as well, right? So I'm curious about what's different as far as, increasing the diversity in this world, in the STEM world, but then the intersectionalities that exist between those three groups as well.
Right. So to kind of go back to what we talked about earlier, so I said the first thing was get rid of them, right? If they're not qualified, get rid of them.
Yeah.
The second part parlays directly into this question, which is we have to start early and we have to start often with making kids get used to STEM. And because kids are kids, right? They don't know. I mean, they might know if they're like 6 or 5 or whatever, if they're gay or they're trans or whatever, or, they might, of course, like as young women or maybe young men know that they want to be a part of the STEM profession. But at the end of the day, we're here as teachers to provide experiences regardless of how a student identifies. And we have to honor that identity, but we also at the same time have that identity alongside the curriculum. And what I'm finding is that the curriculum is not inclusive because, again, right, it focuses mostly on white men. And not to discredit the work that white men have done in STEM, but we know that STEMinists of color exist, and we know that women who are STEMinists exist. And I kind of think back to making curriculum more accessible, but also making it very authentic for our students. And I've spoken about this a couple of times, not with y'all, but just on social media and in presentations that I give, where I feel personally very nervous that because I've seen it firsthand, graduating a cohort and multiple cohorts actually of students who think that STEM is just the fluff. They think that it's coding a robot to represent an absolute value equation. They think that it is, creating water cycle models in plastic bags. They think that STEM is, making a song about, the quadratic formula. And although these are cool projects and activities, if you were to ask any engineer whether or not they've made a song about the quadratic formula, they're probably going to look at you sideways. The
all
same
the
way where if you ask a biologist,
Victoria, I do that all the time.
The same way where if you ask a biologist whether or not, they've done a water cycle model from a bag, again, they might look at you sideways. So we've got the engagement there, I feel like, with the curriculum. The next hurdle is going to be, what is the reality from when they leave K-12, and they go to college and they pursue STEM. Because when I was in South Carolina, I saw this firsthand. I had students that loved their pre-engineering classes. They loved math because of all the projects. They loved science because of all the labs. Then they got to their computer science classes and hated it and either changed majors or dropped out because instead of doing all these hands-on labs, now they're in a situation where they're listening to a lecture, for 60 plus minutes. And that's the unfortunate reality of collegiate education. But that's kind of that pathway, right? So if we can provide authentic, of course, within reason, because I don't expect for a kindergartner to listen to like a 60-minute lecture. But what a kindergartner could do is maybe cut and paste the water cycle, right? Maybe they can have a hands-on demonstration. Maybe we can do Skype in the classroom and have, a hydrologist come in and talk about their experiences. Ways to make it real and grounded for our kids. And then as we move up the chain, infusing those authentic experiences with respect to decolonizing the curriculum. So instead of just focusing on Pythagoras, let's focus on some other cool mathematicians that are not necessarily Eurocentric. Or instead of focusing on Watson and Crick, maybe we'll focus on a couple of other folks that are in the realm of biology. So that's a great way, I think, just across the board, right, for representation for Black women and young Black women, right, women in general, the members of the LGBTQ community. If we were to kind of segment this and make it different person to person or group to group, then that's just even more intentional within that group, right? So like if again, I'm a Black female. If I am doing a project on a STEMinist, then I might look to another Black female, or I might do research on another Black female, or my teacher, hopefully, might give me resources on, Black female groups in the area, that help connect with STEM, because these things exist. Whether or not they're in person or they're face to face, there are PLNs that support this. So my advice to folks who are either just starting or even looking is, reach out to PLNs, because especially in STEM, they're all for it. Like girls who code out in Seattle, like they're at schools all the time. They love it. So reach out to PLNs because they're always, or usually always, very excited to work with youth. Intentionally decolonize your curriculum. Make sure that students have experiences that, kind of detach them from that American, white Eurocentric thought. And then last but not least, provide them for authentic experiences with community leaders, right? That way they don't know that robotics is just like pressing a button and having a robot dance, right? Like robots in our STEM community do so much for us, and kids have to know that.
So, Victoria, let's talk about your new podcast called Courageous Conversations. I was watching the first episode where you discuss the origins of the podcast, and you stated that there's this intersectionality, which Mike just used that word in the previous question. That was great. Between educational technology, humanity, anti-racism, and just courageous conversations in education as a whole. Can you tell us more about that specifically, that intersectionality, and then just the idea behind the podcast as a whole?
Yes. Okay. So Melody McAllister, who's wonderful, by the way, and she's actually the one that got me, she didn't get me my book deal, but she was the one that specifically said, you need to write a book and it needs to happen right now. So then I wrote the book draft, sent it off to EduMatch, and it was just match made in heaven. So my book's coming out next year. Very, very excited.
Awesome.
But so Melody, she and I have a really good working relationship, and she messaged me just wanting to spotlight me on one session, right? Just regarding the work that I do. And I shot back to her that no, it should not be one session. It should be a multiple series, because it was supposed to be about the intersectionality between just anti-racism and educational technology. There are so many different topics that can be covered that if we were to literally do it in one podcast, we'd probably be here for like 3 to 4 hours. So I told her it might be better just to break it up for our peace of mind, because, I don't know about y'all, but I call it Zoomalicious, where I'm just zoomed out by the end of the day, and I just need a screen break.
It's my life.
Yes. So reached out to Melody. Melody was all for it. We decided that would be a good idea. I didn't just want it to be my voice, though, because, I talk all the time, but I think it's a good idea for others to be involved in the conversation, too. So then Dr. Eileen Winokur, and she and I also have a wonderful working relationship. And I also have a great relationship with her son-in-law, who's also on Twitter quite a bit. But I reached out to Dr. Winokur and I said, hey, this would be something wonderful for you to be involved in, because Eileen's been around for she's longer
great.
than I am. She's
awesome.
great. Right. She was a former head of schools for a girls' school. She's a Bunsey ambassador. I've got knowledge, but she's got knowledge.
Yeah,
so
she's heavily involved. She's a big fan of
Yes.
Participate too. So we've talked to her a lot. Yeah.
And she's an ISTE member as well. I actually think that she's a former director of ISTE. So
She's
I was
everywhere.
yes. So I said, you need to be a part of this. And after a couple different iterations, because unbeknownst to me, I kind of knew, but Eileen's in Kuwait. So I'm on Pacific time. Melody's in Alaska. And then Eileen is in Kuwait. Yeah. So it took a couple times just for us to get the time right. But we started having this wonderful collaborative experience just about how important it is to have these types of conversations. And it bred specifically out of a scenario that I shared where, and I'm not a new teacher, but I, help advise new teachers and whatnot, and not where I work, but part of a group that I'm in. There was a teacher that found a resource, and it was right from the perspective of a slave, right? And to me, that raised bells, and not the good kind, in my head, because that's appropriation, and it also doesn't take into account just the cultural context of what happened there. But as a new teacher, they were very excited to use this resource because they found it for free, right? So if I'm looking at educational technology in my experience and my roles as a vehicle for equity, but then in the same breath, we're asking for students to write about, if they were a slave, something's not matching up here, right? And what we're doing is we're unintentionally, perhaps, harming our learners. It's the same way, and a couple of months ago, it was circulating on Teachers Pay Teachers, and it's still up there for some stupid reason, but there's a resource where it compares Anne Frank's quarantine as a Jewish person during the Holocaust to COVID-induced quarantine during state lockdown. And we have been reporting it like wildfire, but it's still not taken down. And again, I worry because when I was a new teacher, I viewed free resources like gold. And I would take that and I would just use it and not even blink twice. So I don't want that to happen with our teachers, and I especially don't want to unintentionally harm our learners. And Mike, I'm looking at your face and you're just like, what the heck?
We're not big fans of Teachers Pay Teachers.
Oh,
right, I know.
Just in general, but
I know.
yes. But this is on a new level, though. Yes.
I call Teachers Pay Teachers the Airbnb of educational technology, because you never know what you're going to get, right?
Glenn has a very storied, prestigious track record of smashing Teachers Pay Teachers every chance he gets.
Oh gosh, I don't do a lot of TPT bashing in public. But in private, I'll show my wife, I'll have my phone out. Look what I found today. I can't believe what I found. I have a friend that runs a semi-prominent TPT store. So whenever I talk about it, I get messages Victoria, I just can't believe you're talking about me. And I'm like, stop talking. This is not about you. This is about the website as a whole. Anyway. So I found these things and we started having this conversation, me, Melody, and Eileen, and found that, of course, there's that intersectionality there, right? Where if we want to be anti-racist with the inevitability of ed tech, because most of us are in virtual or at least hybrid learning environments, what are we doing to advance that mission, right? Y'all read White Fragility over the summer, you read Bettina Love's book, you read this, that, and the other. Now that we're here, what's the work that's being done? And we're not seeing any of it done. And then to add insult to injury, we have these nonsense resources pop up. And I was just like, no, I'm at the end of my rope. And I think that we were all at the end of our rope at that point. So we decided to create this podcast because it's important. And this we crafted specifically in mind with folks that really want to begin in their journey. And maybe if they didn't understand where they needed to go, they at least knew that they had a place where they can discuss and they can get resources straight from the source. No TPT nonsense, no having to vet resources. These are trusted educators that are engrossed in the community that can help you on your journey. So yesterday we had our first one, and it was just intros. Why is this needed? The second one is going to be next week, October 25th, and that's intentionally understanding the needs of our students and what this looks like to have authentic and courageous conversations regardless of where you are, whether you're first-year teacher, veteran, virtual, face-to-face, hybrid, right? What does understanding the needs of our students look like there? The second, which is near and dear to my heart, is that importance of vetting resources, positive intent versus unintended consequences. So if you unintentionally harm a learner, what does that look like? Like, what does the retribution look like? What does the reconciliation look like? And then what can you do as an educator to hopefully, right, make sure that it doesn't happen again? That's huge for me. And then last but not least, on November 22nd, because we're doing it kind of like on a semester by semester basis, what does implementation look like? And that kind of goes back to what I said. Y'all have read the books, you've taken place in the seminars, the webinars, all that stuff. Now let's actually put it into place. You want to be anti-racist, you're working towards dismantling white supremacy. What does this actually look like in our respective spaces? From baby steps to full implementation, what does it look like? So I'm really excited personally because I feel like this is something that is so needed. And we see, we call them edu-celebs, right? Like they've got like 1 million books and they do their conferences. And, sometimes I'll see one pop up and it's like 100 ways to be anti-racist. And I'm thinking, what do you know about, what do you know about being anti-racist? You just popped up on the scene. But Eileen and I both have been doing this for a while. And then just to have Melody along the way as a learner, and Melody's wonderful, 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 but she openly admitted, she's like, I'm here to learn just as much, as the people that are listening. And she's a wonderful facilitator, just super great at fielding questions and navigating that space with us. So, we've kind of got like the advanced, right, with Eileen, we've got the intermediate with me, and then we've got the beginner with the Melody. So it's been a really nice collaboration there.
That's awesome. So if people want to connect with you online, even find the podcast, and then in the near future, hopefully be able to purchase your book, because we definitely have to have you back onto the podcast. Where can they find you online, Victoria?
Yes. So I'm way, 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 way active on Twitter. That's probably the best way for folks to get in contact with me on even a baseline basic level. So I'm on Twitter at Victoria the Tech. And then tech, that is TECH. And everything I have is there, including my website that gives, my blog musings. I actually have a really fun one coming out tomorrow about a microaggression that I encountered 2 weeks ago. So that'll be fun. So it's got my website, which has my blog. It's got my bio. It's got sessions that I give, webinars, and, workshops that I give and all that stuff. And also has a link to my, of course, LinkedIn profile, and just other ways to communicate with me. So I would say Twitter is by far the best way to get in contact, because not only does it have, my voice and my tweets, but it also has the link directly to my website where you can find out more about me.
Victoria Thompson, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. This was wonderful.
Thanks for listening to OnEducation. My name is Glenn Irvin. My co-host is Mike Washburn. OnEducation is part of the On Podcast Media Network. You can listen to this show and many others by great educators like Monica Burns, Mike Matera, Tisha Richmond, and many more by visiting onpodcastmedia.com. Want to get in touch with us? Check out our website, oneducationpodcast.com. You can tweet us at OnEducationPod. Mike is at Mr. Washburn on Twitter, and I can be found on Twitter at IrvSpanish. You can find us on Facebook by visiting facebook.com/OnEducationPod. We're also on Instagram at OnEducationPod. If you're enjoying the show and think others would too, we would be thrilled if you shared it with them. Please leave us a rating or review in Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts. When you leave a rating, it gives our rankings a boost. This helps others discover the show. We want to thank our presenting sponsor, Participate, for supporting us. Check out participate.com to learn more about them. Thanks as always for listening, stay awesome, and see you soon.